Talking Trees with Lily and Jad. Welcome to Talking Trees. Today's episode explores a comprehensive guide that offers detailed instructions for responsibly managing trees with safety in mind. The document emphasizes the delicate balance between the benefits trees bring and the potential risks they pose, reminding us that absolute safety is unattainable. Join us as we delve into these guidelines and uncover strategies for a safer, greener future.
Welcome back, everyone, to the Deep Dive. This time, we're diving into something that's probably already on your radar as professional arborists. It's the newly updated Common Sense Risk Management of Trees from the National Tree Safety Group.
Yes.
We all know that tree risk assessment is important.
Right.
But this deep dive is about going deeper.
Okay.
Going beyond just checking boxes. We're going to explore the interesting history behind this guidance and why this update matters now.
Okay.
More than ever.
Yeah.
And how understanding its nuances can really elevate your practice.
It's interesting how this guidance came about. Back in 2007, there was this growing concern that we were losing too many trees.
Yeah.
Unnecessarily.
Oh, yeah.
A sort of knee-jerk reaction to perceived risk, I guess. So the NTSG was formed to bring together arborists, landowners, researchers, even government agencies to find a better way.
Yeah.
A way to balance safety with the undeniable benefits trees provide.
It was a real coming together of different perspectives. And that first guidance they released in 2011 quickly became like the go-to for our profession.
Absolutely.
It acknowledged the duty of care landowners have, but also provided a framework for making sensible decisions about trees.
Exactly.
But like all things, the world of trees doesn't stand still. And in the years since that first edition, we've seen new challenges emerge, like widespread tree diseases, shifting public perceptions, and even legal cases that have clarified responsibilities, sometimes in ways that surprise people. So this new second edition, released just this year, is a direct response to that changing landscape.
Yes.
And it was a massive undertaking, 3 years of work by experts across the field, all aimed at giving arborists like ourselves the tools to navigate this increasingly complex world.
One thing that really stands out in the second edition is the emphasis on the concept of the reasonable and prudent landowner.
Okay.
You know, it's a legal term, but it's also a guiding principle for how we approach tree risk. What would a reasonable person with reasonable knowledge do in a given situation? Right. That's the question.
Yeah.
We're always trying to answer.
And that's not always easy.
No.
We're constantly balancing competing interests.
Yeah.
Public safety, the health of the tree, the wishes of the landowner, and even the broader ecological impact.
Absolutely. And it's worth remembering that, you know, we're operating within a legal framework as well. The Health and Safety at Work Act of 1974 is very clear that as professionals working with trees, we have a legal responsibility to manage risk to a level that is as low as reasonably practicable.
Right. ALRP, as we often call it. It's not about eliminating all risk, because let's face it, that's impossible.
Yeah.
But it's about taking all reasonable steps to minimize it.
Exactly.
And this is where the NTSG guidance becomes so valuable. It provides a framework for thinking through those steps, for weighing the risks and the benefits, and for making decisions that are both defensible and in the best interests of everyone involved.
And one thing that really struck me as particularly insightful was in Section 2, they actually delve into the extensive benefits these provide, not just the obvious environmental benefits, but also the social, economic, and even psychological benefits.
That section is pure gold.
It is.
Especially when you're dealing with a client who might be leaning towards tree removal.
Yeah.
It arms you with the evidence to make a compelling case for preservation, even when a tree presents some level of risk.
And sometimes that means challenging the prevailing narrative of risk aversion.
Yeah.
You know, the data actually shows that the risk of serious harm from trees is statistically very low.
Yeah, I was surprised by that.
Yeah.
The guide mentions that in the UK, despite millions of people being under trees daily, the annual individual fatality risk is less than 1 in 15 million.
Wow.
It really puts things in perspective. But we also have to acknowledge the reality that specific trees can and do pose significant risks.
So you do.
So how do we reconcile those seemingly contradictory truths?
That's a great question.
Yeah.
That's the heart of it, isn't it?
Yeah.
How do we balance that statistical reality with the need to address real tangible risks?
Right. That's where understanding tree biology becomes crucial.
Absolutely.
And that's where Section 3 of the guidance really shines.
Yes.
It reminds us that decay, cavities, even hollow trunks are often natural parts of a tree's life cycle. It's a shift away from a purely risk-averse perspective to one that recognizes these features as part of the tree's story, part of its ecological value.
Yeah, I like that.
It's about looking beyond the obvious signs of damage and understanding what's really going on inside the tree, right?
Exactly.
And then, of course, we have Section 6.
Okay.
The practical hands-on part of the guidance, where they lay out the framework for actually managing tree risk. This is where it gets really interesting for us as arborists. The guidance walks you through a range of assessment methods, from informal observations to very detailed inspections, using specialized tools. It's about choosing the right level of assessment for each situation, taking into account the tree, the site, and even the broader context.
Absolutely.
And that's where our expertise comes in.
Yeah.
We're the ones making those judgment calls based on our knowledge, our experience, and our understanding of those specific circumstances.
Precisely. And this guidance is there to support us in making those decisions, giving us a framework that's rooted in both science and common sense.
Yeah, I like that. Good.
You know, and one of the most useful things, I think, in this updated guidance is that it provides some concrete examples of site management techniques that can help minimize risk without resorting to tree removal. So this is incredibly valuable in those situations where preserving a tree is a top priority, whether because of its historical significance or its ecological role, or even just its sheer beauty.
I was really impressed by that, too. One thing to talk about these concepts, but seeing them play out in real-world scenarios, that's what really brings it home.
It's what makes this guidance so practical. You know, it walks you through a range of different situations, like a bustling city park with high pedestrian traffic, or a private estate with ancient trees, or even a business with limited public access. And it shows how those principles of risk management can be applied in each context.
It's like having a seasoned mentor by your side, helping you think through the options, weigh the pros and cons, and ultimately arrive at a decision that's in everyone's best interests.
That's a great analogy.
Thanks.
It really captures the essence of this guidance. It's about empowering arborists to make those informed decisions.
And speaking of knowledge, one thing that really jumped out at me was the emphasis on observation. It's not just about ticking boxes on a form.
No.
It's about really looking at the tree, understanding its structure, its health, how it interacts with its surroundings.
The guidance encourages a sort of multi-layered approach to observation. It talks about informal procedures, things like simply noticing a potentially hazardous tree while you're driving or walking by. But then also more formal checks and inspections. It's about being constantly aware, constantly learning from the trees themselves.
So even those informal observations can be valuable.
Again?
They can help you spot potential issues early on before they escalate into something serious.
Absolutely. And then based on that initial observation, you can decide if a more formal inspection is needed. And the guidance offers some really clear criteria for making that judgment call, for moving from that informal observation to a more in-depth assessment.
It's like a triage system for trees.
That's a great way to put it. And that initial assessment often guides your decision about the most appropriate risk management strategy. So it might be something as straightforward as pruning a branch, or it could involve more complex interventions like installing support systems, or in certain cases, making the difficult decision to remove the tree.
And that decision-making process is really where this guidance shines. It provides a framework for weighing the risks and the benefits, taking into account the tree's condition, its location, and the potential consequences if something were to go wrong.
And it encourages you to think beyond just the immediate risks, to consider the long-term implications of your actions. For instance, if you do decide to remove a tree, what impact will that have on the local ecosystem? Are there ways to mitigate those impacts? Perhaps through replacement planting or creating new habitat features.
It's about taking that holistic, proactive approach to tree management, thinking about the bigger picture and the long-term health of the urban forest. And that proactive approach often involves considering the potential for harm before it even arises. The guidance talks about strategies like zoning areas based on occupancy levels, ensuring that tree work contracts include provisions for replacement planting, even just communicating with the public about potential risks in a clear and understandable way.
Absolutely.
It's about moving beyond just reacting to problems and instead adopting a more strategic, preventative mindset. Now let's talk about something that's often a point of confusion, even among experienced arborists.
Right.
The difference between a hazard and a risk. I really appreciate how the updated guidance provides clear definitions for these terms. It's so helpful for clarifying our thinking.
I'm glad you brought that up.
Yeah.
The distinction is absolutely crucial.
Yeah.
The guidance defines a hazard as anything that has the potential to cause harm.
Okay.
So in the context of trees, that could be a dead branch.
Right.
A decayed trunk, roots that have been compromised.
Okay.
Anything that could potentially lead to failure.
But just because a tree has a hazard doesn't mean there's a high risk.
Right, exactly.
Okay.
Risk is the likelihood of that hazard actually causing harm.
Okay.
So you might have a tree with a large cavity.
Right.
But if it's located in a secluded woodland with no paths or structures nearby, the risk of it causing harm is relatively low.
Okay.
And that's why it's so important to consider both the hazard and the potential targets when you're assessing risk.
Yep.
And the guidance provides some helpful tips on how to identify potential targets, including people, property, and even infrastructure like power lines and roads.
And the guidance also stresses the importance of considering the likelihood of a hazard actually leading to failure.
Right.
Just because a tree has a defect doesn't mean it's on the verge of collapse.
Doesn't.
Trees are incredibly resilient.
Yeah.
And they often have amazing ways of compensating for structural weaknesses.
And that's where our knowledge of tree biology is so critical.
Yeah.
We need to be able to assess not just the hazard itself, but also the tree's overall health and vitality.
Okay.
Is it showing signs of stress? Is it growing vigorously? These factors can all influence the likelihood of failure.
And the guidance is very clear that this assessment process should be based on both knowledge and experience.
Absolutely.
It's not about plugging numbers into a formula. It's about using your judgment, your understanding of trees, to make a reasonable and prudent assessment of the risk.
It's about taking all the information you've gathered, factoring in your years of experience, and making a call that aligns with both best practices and that core principle of being a reasonable and prudent landowner.
And I think it's important to acknowledge that the guidance is very upfront about the fact that there's no such thing as zero risk when it comes to trees.
Right.
We can't eliminate all possibility of harm.
Oh, no, we can't.
But we can manage that risk to a level that's acceptable, a level that balances safety with the many benefits trees provide.
That's such a key point.
Yeah.
It's about finding that sweet spot, that acceptable level of risk that allows us to coexist with trees in a way that's both safe and sustainable.
And I think this updated guidance does a really incredible job of providing a framework for navigating that complex terrain, helping us make decisions that are responsible, well-informed, and truly respectful of the trees we care for so deeply.
And you know, it's important to remember that this guidance isn't just for arborists working in public spaces or managing large estates. It's relevant for anyone who has trees on their property. Whether it's a homeowner with a mature oak in their backyard or a farmer with a hedgerow bordering a public road, we all have a responsibility when it comes to the trees we share our world with. I highly recommend downloading the full document from the NTSG website.
Okay.
They have both full and summary versions available.
Great.
Take some time to really explore it in detail.
Okay.
Especially those real-world scenarios they provide.
Right.
They really bring the principles to life.
And as you're reading through it, I challenge you to think critically about how you can apply these principles, not only to your client work, but also to your role as advocates for trees in your communities.
How can you use this knowledge to educate others about the importance of trees?
Right.
How can you help shift the conversation away from fear and towards a more balanced, nuanced understanding of risk.
Okay.
How can you be a voice for trees in a world that often prioritizes short-term convenience over long-term sustainability?
These are questions worth pondering, because ultimately our work as arborists is about more than just managing risk. It's about ensuring that trees continue to thrive in our landscapes, providing all those invaluable benefits for generations to come.
Well said.
Keep learning, keep growing.
Yeah.
And keep those trees standing tall.
Absolutely.
Thank you for joining us on today's episode of Talking Trees. We've explored a comprehensive guide to responsible tree management, balancing the undeniable benefits of trees with the inherent risks, understanding key concepts, risk assessment methods, and legal duties for landowners in the UK. By examining a decision-making model and 9 practical scenarios, we hope you feel empowered to make informed choices that safeguard both our community and the environment. Until next time, keep nurturing our green spaces with care and wisdom.